Now, what is the anti-Christian perspective that is not some cringe neo-atheist one? You'll listen to Richard Dawkins give out about Christianity and he'll say stuff like, oh yes, well, Yahweh is very envious and mean. He's a very selfish God. If you ask me personally, when you read through the Old Testament, he's a bad man altogether. You see this stuff and you kind of say, this is shallow. I'm not sure this is the right thing. He's basically like a Christian without God type thing going on here. But there is a critique of Christianity that comes from people like Nietzsche that is based on a very strong first principle. Now, it starts with us assessing what is the problem with the modern world. You look around the modern world and you'll talk to an awful lot of Christians, and understandably they'll say it's terrible. There's people who are transgender, the girls are going up on OnlyFans, people are all sterile in the West, nobody's making families, the fertility rate is dropping, nobody's moral anymore, everything is falling apart at the seams. Now, an awful lot of people are reacting to the modern world in the last 2 or 3 years, so they're developing a very emotional stance based on what's going on. They start stomping their foot and ranting about religion and stuff like this. But there's actually quite an awful lot of people who've been speaking about this. Modern writers and theorists and intellectuals have been talking about this for centuries at this point. And they're all discussing one fundamental driving principle that is not ideological, not up in the air, but actually quite grounded. And it's the fact that through technology, through the Industrial Revolution, we have become changed. Something has happened to us. You had man in the 18th century who lived on his farm and drank raw milk all day, and he was powerful and strong, was able to assert himself and establish boundaries. And you look at modern man and he's pumped full of seed oils. He lives in this techno-capital super society, and he's small and he's petty. He's been socialized into a little lamb, a little tiny little entity that has no will and no power. And for this reason, he can't assert himself. He can't set boundaries. He can't assert any morality. He can't turn around to people and say no, and he can't establish things and fight for things anymore because he doesn't have it inside of him to do this anymore. And so this question then sets up the premise. How do we transform that situation? How do we get man full of life again? How do we get man full of power and will and energy again? How do we moralize man? And this is where the deviation starts to happen, because the good future is dependent on us being able to transform that spirit inside man, what man is. Now, an awful lot of people would think, for example, that you give them religion. Give religion man and it will moralize him. And there's actually truth to that. There's definitely truth to that. This is why I never try to get in the way of people finding their faith and stuff like this. You going back to your faith and going back to religion is going to moralize you to some extent. But the real critique of Christianity and religiousness is about saying that these beliefs, this ideology, this sort of like hopeful, romantic type of moralization is not actually going to get the end result that we're looking for. Instead, what we need is a view on the world that's grounded in biology, grounded in the real world, the world down here, nature and life. And if we want to make man better, if we want to transform man, we're going to have to develop man. We're going to have to set up a society, a social structure that actually makes man tangibly better based on grounded things. Education, health, biological realism overall. This needs to be established within everything. Now, the woke movement is a brilliant example of the power of modern technology and institutions gone wrong. We've allowed these people to saturate into our educational institutions, delude children about these lies about the nature of the world and these lies about biology, and then use the power of modern hormonal technology and the incredible powers of medicine and science to literally bewitch these people into cutting their own testicles off before they even reach adulthood and whatnot. Now, this goes to show you the transformation of power that modern society can have on people. These institutions exist and they can do incredible things to people. Now, flip this. That's the negative way that this manifests. What would be the positive way? Say, for example, you took these kids. We all studied as a society nutrition to its highest aspect. And then all these kids had these perfect diets designed to make them as tall and strong as they possibly could, to make sure that their brains are growing as much as possible. All the specifics were covered. They were fed with as much high quality saturated fats and high quality sugar, so their brains just like swollen and they look like Dexter or something like this. This is what you would start to see, is that these people would become better. Their IQs would be higher. They'd be stronger, healthier, and bigger. They'd be more handsome. Everybody overall would be more beautiful. It'd be a better place to live. When they went into the education system, it wasn't a brainwashing camp full of midwits who were just blathering on nonsense. Instead, it was reformed and built in a correct way, so that when these kids went in there, they were all trained to be massive, juicy Spartans. They'd come out and they've all got these physiques at the age of 16. They're taught like Greek memory techniques, rhetoric and stuff like this. They were empowered. Their innate faculties and capacities were brought out in the most powerful way possible. How much better would their lives be? Education would be transformative of them. If you talk to anybody nowadays, education is always framed with this negative perspective. People talk about how it was a waste of time. They felt that they didn't really learn anything inside of it. It's always got that feeling to it. But it doesn't have to be that way. Instead, you could have these projects that improve man, that make man better. And over the course of generations, that would have a massive, massive effect. Now, the problem with religiousness and Christianity in general is that it is very weak on this focus. The whole premise and nature of Christianity and this sort of ideological thinking is that it's obsessed about the world of ideas. The point of Christianity is it has to sort of convince you that Christianity and the Jewish text are the nature of reality and how the world works. And so it becomes this problem where if you're going to get a religious training, you're very restricted into this world model. You're constantly epistemologically reading through the Jewish perspective on history embedded within the Testaments. And of course, the history of the Jewish people is wonderful. The history of Christianity is wonderful. It is actually full of virtue. Christ is full of virtue. Christ is a great model to follow towards morality and things like this. But what is missing from this is this biological realism and this understanding of nature and this focus on natural health outcomes and developing health and developing a capacity for you to be strong and juicy. That's actually what is going to get the end result of transforming people into better, more powerful people. Not religious platitudes, not installing these sort of historical stories and all this type of stuff inside of them. Instead, we actually need action to happen. Nietzsche said in Twilight of the Idols that the starting place of culture is not the soul, not the intellect, not the platitudes, but it is the body. The body must be persuaded, and that's actually where the rubber hits the road, because the genetic information and making sure that that fulfills itself and manifests itself in its most beautiful form, that should be our goal. We want the best brains, the best body, not what we put into those brains, not the ideology. It's almost like an anti-ideological perspective. And these religions like Christianity and all these types of things have this problem built into them where they are naturally ideological. They're concerned about ideals. When you come across Christians, they're trying to persuade you their version of history, which is, their prerogative. They're allowed to do this. But it's not going to lead to the end result that actually matters, which is changing how we express our genes and how we become powerful and manifest ourselves in the world. Now, this critique is not like Richard Dawkins' one where he says, your Bible's fake and all this stuff. Instead, it's actually a much more sophisticated thing. It's pushing a standard upon Christianity and saying, look, the goal that we're trying to achieve here involves doing things that don't seem to exist within the Weltanschauung, the worldview, the focus, the way, the thinking pattern that you have about the world. Your philosophical perspective is just wrong on first principles. It's getting in the way of what actually matters and actually counts. And I've noticed that it's very hard to bring this up with Christians because they immediately begin to rationalize and do what the religion has taught them to do, which is to be ideologues. And that in some sense proves the point. And lastly, I'm not sure these things necessarily have to be at odds. The focus I see coming from the critiquing perspective is just more of a goal-orientated focus. It's very unideological. It's not really too concerned about, declaring beliefs. And Nietzsche was very much like this. It's sort of saying to yourself, right, well, what is practically needed to be done in order to transform the world towards something that's more ideal and better and more beautiful? And I've met many Christians who have learned this stuff and actually integrated it into their perspective and developed a very empowering, healthy style of Christianity, which is good. Power to them. Happy days. Go out there with their brilliant, strong communities full of healthy people and just keep that up. Make sure that that does not slip into some type of degenerate problem with modernity. So that is the take overall.